Let's welcome Louis Zamperini.
Okay.
Last night we interviewed Louis at Harvest in Riverside, and I first became familiar with you, Louis, when I saw a photograph in a newspaper of a man who was in his 80s riding a skateboard, and I was fascinated by this photo, and I then read the article that told the amazing story of your life. So last night we gave Louis this special skateboard, the great Zamperini. So, well, Louis, thank you for being with us here tonight. We're so glad to see you, and so many people have been so looking forward to this time. You've lived such an amazing life, but you know, you didn't start out with a lot of promise. You were a bit of a troublemaker living there in Torrance, a little bit of a hoodlum, wouldn't you say?
Well, they called me a rotten kid.
And you got into trouble a lot with the law and were kind of a little bit of a troublemaker, right?
Well, yeah, I formed a little gang, and we, in the movie theaters, was a dime to get in the movies, so everybody went to the movies on Saturday night, and we knew who made the beer and the wine and the liquor.
Yeah.
So when they went to the movies, we'd get in their house and get the loot, and hide it. We had a cave out in the trees, and we'd hide it there, and then the next day we'd go to the beach and lay on the beach and drink beer or whatever we had, wine. Yeah. But the lifeguards were like policemen then, and they came down and reprimanded us. So I worked at a dairy part-time, so I filled the milk bottle full of white paint, left it upside down at night, and then left it in the sun for 3 or 4 days. And then we poured our wine or our beer into the milk bottle, and of course the lifeguards thought we were drinking milk.
Wow.
Reformed kids, that's what we were.
Yeah. So, but your brother Pete was quite a runner, and he got you into running, and running helped you to get out of this lifestyle, didn't it? And kind of changed the course of your life somewhat?
Well, yeah, my brother knew I had no interest, only gang-related interest, and so I'm a great believer in getting young people started in different things.
Right.
So that when they're bored, they say, hey, let's go play tennis, or let's go do this. But I had none, so I just said, hey, let's go do this, and it was the wrong thing. And so the police it got so bad that when something happened in town, they just park in front of my house and wait for me to come home. and like my brother said, he said, when the police car went south, I went north.
Yeah, a little closer. So, but you were so fast. You were such a skilled runner that you had a nickname there. The Torrance, what was it?
Torrance Tornado.
Torrance Tornado. Yeah. And of course you went to USC. You've got the USC hat on tonight.
Yeah, well, that's my trademark, and I think the first game of this year with Utah, I'm flipping the coin. So.
Oh, are you really? Fantastic. Louis, you were so fast that you qualified to run for the United States of America in the 1936 Olympics in Germany.
Yeah.
So tell us about that experience. How old were you when you were that was your first time out on a big ship, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I was a teenager, 18 years old,
Yeah,
and
wow.
And I was a champion high school miler, had what they call the national or world's record, but that didn't compare to the 5 great milers who are in college or graduated. And so I just decided that it's hopeless, so I didn't decide to train.
Yeah.
And then the second best 5,000 meter runner came to Compton to run, and my brother, who was the coach, he said, you got 10 days to train for that longer race. Now, in those days, they didn't want kids to run that far. And so I trained for 10 days, and he said, I just want to see how close you can get to a fellow we know who will make the Olympics. And I passed him 2 laps before we finished. He couldn't take it. He passed me, I passed him, and people were going crazy. And nobody expected me to be in the race with this guy. And down the home stretch, I passed him about 15 yards. And then we were lapping another runner from San Pedro. And the officials were so shocked at my performance, they didn't expect it. And when I started passing, they motioned him off to the track the wrong way. He ran right in front of me. We collided. I went down out of my knees, got up, and now my opponent is ahead again. I caught him at the tape, but he beat me about an inch. So I knew that I could beat him. So on the strength of that performance, the Olympic Committee sent me an invitation to go to New York for the tryouts. But it's funny, because in those days, the Depression, all these athletes are invited when they qualify, but how do you get to New York? There was no money. We had some people hitchhiked. A guy took a motorcycle from Seattle all the way there to compete. But my dad worked for the Pacific Electric Red Cars, and he was allowed 1 pass a year on the Southern Pacific Railway. So I got my round trip, and then I had nothing to wear, no suitcase. And so the merchants in town got together and gave me everything I needed. And they took a little offering around town, so I'd have spending money to eat on the train. And then in New York, I had a room with another buddy. And we ran on the hottest day New York had for about 90 years. And boy, people were dropping like flies. And anyway, my brother said, you're going to run against the world's record holder in a 2-mile, John Lash. And I want you to get behind him and just keep your eye on the back of his head. Well, as a kid, a world record holder to me was, it was just unbelievable. And I'm running behind him, and I had a chance to pass him the last lap, but I didn't. I just said, well, how do you pass a world champion? And I waited too late till the last 2:20, and now he's in the first lane, his buddy's in the second lane behind, and I had to run the third lane around half of the track, which put me about 12 yards further to run. And by the time we down the home stretch, we ran neck and neck to the tape, and you couldn't put I don't think there was a half inch between us. Yeah. So that qualified me. I couldn't believe it. I'm on the team, and now they took care of me. They put me in a hotel, gave me clothes, paid for everything once you're on the team. And I'll never forget, I just found the card I mailed to my mother. We're in this hotel, and I wrote to her and said that, you won't believe it, Mom, but they got a radio in every room.
Wow, cutting edge technology in that time.
Now, my big problem was with not having been away from home. The only time I ate out, I had I think it was a tuna fish sandwich with olive on it, and that was the only time I ever ate out. That was in a drugstore. During the Depression, we had to forage for food. We had to go out and pick wild radishes, wild tomatoes, and had to shoot cottontail rabbits for rabbit cacciatore. And when we ran out of money again, my mother said, go to the beach, Louis, and bring me home 4 or 5 abalones. Well, that was poor man's food. But today it's $100 a pound. Yeah. So anyway, so I get aboard the ship, and when they start bringing the food on a boat, I couldn't believe it. Not one sweet roll, but 5 different kinds of sweet rolls. Yeah. My eyes just popped out of my head, and I went for the gold, but it was food.
Good. Yeah, I think I can win that myself. So you put on a few pounds on that boat, as I recall.
At least 14 pounds.
And who was your roommate at the Olympics? Who was your roommate?
My roommate was Jesse Owens and Mac Robinson.
So amazing. So here you are, you run in the Olympics in 1936 there in Germany. World War II has not started yet. You run the 5,000-meter event. You get 8th place, but you ran so fast that there was a request sent by Adolf Hitler who wanted to meet you. Do you remember meeting Hitler?
Well, it was, being overweight, I couldn't keep up the pace. But, so the last lap, all the great runners are up front. There were 7 of them. And then there was a 50-yard gap between them and us. And I was really tired. And at the last lap, my brother said, well, everybody's tired. And he gave me a formula. He said, isn't 1 minute of pain worth a lifetime of glory? So I spent the whole last lap under the 1 minute, 56 seconds. And the grandstand people jumped up, it was quite a sight, I guess. And but I came in 8th. But as a result of that, I got an invitation from an officer to see Hitler. And I said, well, I didn't win a gold. He said, well, no, he just wants to see you. So I went over there, and all he said was, the boy with the fast finish. That was it.
So while you were there in Germany, you did a little sightseeing, and you saw a Nazi flag hanging off a flagpole, and you decided you wanted a souvenir. Tell us what happened there.
Well, that was another thing I enjoyed about the Olympians. They all collect souvenirs to bring home. And I had a lot of childhood training about taking things home. So I started my collection on the boat. And then in Germany, after I competed, about 2 days later, I went to Berlin with a buddy, and they had what they call beer automats, where you put in 20 pfennigs and you get beer, but not a cup like this, it's a liter. And that's the smallest beer they had. And we had 2 beers, and I got a little frisky. And we walked down the street, and I saw a limousine pull up in front of the Chancellery, and Hitler got out, and I think it was General Göring. No, not Göring, it was Fritz. And they went inside. In the meantime, there's guards on the front, they meet at the gate, turn about, walk to the corner. So I timed them, and I knew I had plenty of time to get across the street and tear this flag down. But when I got to the flag, it was about a foot higher than I had anticipated, and I couldn't reach it. So the guards started to scream in German, and I just panicked. I jumped as high as I could and just barely clutched it, ripped it from the pole, and I did what I do best. I started to run.
Here's the actual flag. This is the flag itself.
Yeah.
So you ripped that flag down, and what happened then?
Well, the guards started screaming at me as they ran toward me, and I just started to run across the street, and I heard a shot. So one of the guards shot in the air, and then I stopped. They came up, and they handled me rather roughly at first, till they saw the Olympic insignia and the American flag, and then they were more gentle, and then the guard went in the Chancellery, I think he talked to General von Fritz. I remember that name when he came out. And he said, but why did you tear down the swastika? Now, we had 2 Jewish boys aboard our Olympians. They were in the relay. And he thought I was probably one of them, and I tore the flag down for racial reasons. But I said, no, I just wanted to take the flag home to America, to always remind me of the wonderful time I had in your country.
Doing along with that. So let's fast forward a little bit. So World War II breaks out. The Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor. You're in the military. You're flying missions in a plane called Superman. You're a bombardier. And later, you're transferred over to another plane called the Green Hornet, and you're flying it's a rickety old plane. You're flying a special mission, a rescue mission, and the Green Hornet goes down over the Pacific. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, it was quite a drop for us to leave Superman because we had a good ground crew, and they said it's our plane. They took good care of it. We had no problems with Superman. But the Green Hornet was a lemon, and we couldn't use it in combat. It wouldn't get off the ground with a bomb load. But if it did get off the ground without a bomb load, instead of flying like this, it flew like this. It was a musher. and nobody wanted to fly it. And we had just come back from a mission, and a report came that a B-25 had radioed in that they were making a water landing north of the island of Palmyra, which is about 800 miles south of Hawaii. Right. So we were ready to head into town to take our 2-day vacation, and the operations officer came out and halted us and said, we want you to fly down and search for this plane. Well, we said, our plane's got to be searched. It'll take all day long. Well, you can take the Green Hornet. We said, oh, no. But they said, well, it passed inspection. So the commander, when he talks to you and asks you a question, it's really a command. So we took the Green Hornet, and we got to the very area where they reported going down, and we started to circle the waters to see if we could find any debris or a life raft. And then number one motor quit. And we had a whole new crew because we had just got back from Nauru, where we bombed the phosphate plant at Nauru. And we came back with 600 bullet holes and 5 cannon holes. And everything shot up inside, 7 men laid out on the deck and 1 dead. And so that plane, Superman, was then condemned. They couldn't restore it. And we crash landed when we came back to Funafuti. And so we were assigned a new plane, which was a good plane. And now we're in the Green Hornets. And when number one, well, we had a new crew come over from the States because we lost our crew. And the pilot called the engineer to come up and feather the motor. Well, actually, it's a co-pilot's job. But it's in the book. The pilot and co-pilot fly every day in the same spot. The co-pilot, who will be a number one pilot, he said, let's switch seats. I want to get familiar with, the left side. So now he's using his right hand on the throttle, the co-pilot the left hand. So there's a little confusion there. And so they called the engineer to feather the motor. And there's 4 buttons up there, and he comes up and he feathers the wrong motor. So 2 motors out on the same wing, and the plane drops over, starts to lose an altitude. And even though it's wrong, you have to do it. You push full throttle on the 2 starboard engines. And what that does, it takes the plane and pushes it around and down. So we went heading down with full motors going, and that's why the plane blew up into bits.
And so of the 11 men on board, only 3 survive. Yourself, the pilot, Russell Allen Phillips, and tail gunner, Francis McNamara, who you called Mac. So now here you are in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in a life raft. And did you think you would live through this? Did you think this was the end when you crashed and managed to get in that raft? Because I know you went underwater. Tell us about how you were wrapped in all those cords and then that passage you mentioned.
Well, kids ask me, do you ever think about dying? That's a big question the kids ask. And no, never thought about dying. We just thought about living. Yeah. And we focused on that. And I had plenty of survival training to make it work. My problem was the pilot and the tail gunner were blowing free of the wreckage. Yeah. But I was trapped in the waist section. Why? Because the tripod that holds the machine gun up is in front of me, and I hold the life raft on my body. And then just before we hit, I ducked down low, and so I ended up under the tripod with the raft below me, and I was severely and painfully wedged into that tripod, so there's no way I could move. And to make matters worse, the tail snapped off, and the wires are springy wires. They coil up. The wires coiled around me. I'm already trapped hopelessly. And I'm completely entangled in wires, and I thought, well, this is it. I knew I was dead. And now I have to laugh when people say, I thought I was going to die, and my whole life went before my eyes. You don't have time for your life to pass before your eyes. You only have time to say, God, help me. And that's what I said in my mind and heart. God, help me. I'm dead anyway, so my last request. And then I went down at least 20 feet when my ears popped. Then I was down probably 100, 150 feet when my forehead I had a severe pain from the pressure, and then I lost consciousness. But just before I did, I said in my heart, God help me. And then I'm conscious again. And this is strange because the first second that I became conscious, I thought, this is the afterlife. and it wasn't like the Bible said. Then I started fighting for air, but I was completely away from, I never felt the tripod again, never felt the wires. I'm free in the waist section of the ship, and I'm floating upwards. My body is buoyant, but the plane is sinking rapidly. I'm going up rapidly, and I tried to get out of the plane. I kept flailing around in the darkness, and my USC ring caught onto the right waist window. And the pressure was so severe with the plane sinking and my buoyancy that I couldn't let go, and thank God for that. So I had to pull myself down and arch my back out the window, took skin off my back, and it seemed like forever to get to the surface. Swallowing gasoline, oil, and blood, and I got up there and I just threw everything up. And then the pilot and tail gunner had been up there. They said I was down about 2 or 3 minutes.
Wow.
And they thought everybody was dead, but they screamed at me, help, help. Well, the life raft was drifting away from the plane, and I was fully clothed. And so I tried to swim to catch it, but the current took it faster than I could swim. But when it extended from the plane, it had a 100-foot cord, and it had a pin on it. So when it goes out there, the pressure of the pin causes the CO2 cartridge to inflate the raft. Then when the raft inflated, it pulls the pin out of the ship. When I looked back at the pilot and tail gunner and thought, well, we're all dead, the last 3 feet of that cord was going by my face. So I grabbed it, reeled in the life raft, and that's what saved us. I got the pilot, and he had arterial blood shooting out of his head. So I made a compress, put it tightly on his head, and then we settled back in the raft. And within 30 minutes, the tail gunner panicked and started screaming, and he lost control completely. We're going to die. We're all going to die. And I said, Mac, nobody's going to die. Settle down. He kept screaming, and of course that wasn't good for the pilot, who lost a lot of blood. And so I tried to use, I took psychology in college, so I tried that. And that didn't work, so then I threatened to report him. I said, we're going to be picked up tomorrow, today, and I'm making a report to the commander. And that didn't work, so I just turned my back on him and came around with knuckles, and I cracked him across the face. Knocked him on his fanny, and he was completely content. Well, wait a minute. 5 days later, I had to do it again, and again he was content. Just laid there with, happy. And, but after that, he settled down, and but we thought he would fall apart and hallucinate or something. But we had these mental exercises every day. Songs, teaching each other the words of songs, reminiscing, what did he go to after the war? I told him about physiology, which was my major. And so we exchanged things like that mentally every day to keep our minds sharp. Right. My professor at college said your mind is like a muscle. If you don't exercise it, it will atrophy. So actually, he died on the 33rd day, but he was far from hallucination. He was sharper after 33 days the day he crashed.
And here you were out in the middle of the Pacific. You ended up, you were at sea, adrift at sea for, 47 days? And here's a description from your book written by Laura Hildebrand about what happened. Looking over the side of the raft, they saw it. Swelling up from under the water came a leviathan, a vast white mouth, a broad back parting the surface, and a long dorsal fin, ghostly in the moonlight. The animal was some 20 feet long, more than 3 times the length of the raft. Louis recognized its features from his survival school training. It was a great white shark. So that wasn't the only shark. The sharks were circling, they were coming up underneath the raft, and pretty soon they were coming into the raft. But you took care of one of those sharks, or a few of them, didn't you?
The thing is, I was never scared on the raft except for that great white, because we were trying to sleep. Well, we put 4 inches of water in the raft because our bodies warmed that a little bit, so it's better than the ocean. The shark came up, slapped us on the bottom, lifted us out of the water. 3 guys in a raft. I thought it was a submarine. And then I saw the sharks swimming around, and I thought, oh my God, don't make a sound. Now, the shark was like a human being. Every time he went that long way of the raft, he would take his tail and flip water on us to see what we were. He did that about 8 or 10 times, and we just sat motionless, no sound, and he finally disappeared, just like he came. And that was scary, because if he was big enough to bite the raft in two and take us all.
Yeah. But you had to eat, and these sharks were trying to eat you, and so you decided to turn the tables on the sharks, and you ate them.
That was really ironic. The other 2 guys were sleeping, and I was awake, and I kept watching these. There's always 2 sharks for some reason, and they kept circling around, circling. That's all they do. And so I thought, well, it would kind of be like one with nature if I could touch one of them. So I put my hand over his head when he went by, and my hand went over his dorsal fin, and I thought, hey, that's neat. Has it been at one with nature, as they say? And I did that to both sharks twice. And then all of a sudden, and this was unusual, it never happened before, they both disappeared. There was always 2 sharks. Nothing scared them away, but these 2 disappeared. Now I'm on my knees looking to see where they are, and this head comes up out of the water, mouth open, and it was like a demon out of hell. I mean, it just scared me. And I inadvertently put my hands up. Well, I had it high enough so the shark's mouth is, when he opens his mouth, his snoot is about a foot ahead of his mouth, and he turns that up. Well, I got him on the top of the nose and pushed him back in, and then the tail gunner couldn't figure out what was happening. He woke up, grabbed an oar. I grabbed an oar, and I'll tell you, for the next 10 minutes, they kept trying to jump in the raft. We kept jabbing them with the oar. And they finally gave up, and they left. Well, what that did to me, it made me really mad. And being Italian, I wanted to get even. And so I decided to make them part of our food chain. And well, this was, biting off more than we could chew, but so I waited for a small shark. The next day, a 5-footer came by, and I thought, well, that's not small, but I'll try my luck. So when he came by the raft, slowly circling, I reached in and grabbed him by the tail, but I didn't get his tail out of the water fast enough, and he pulled me in, and I got out fast, and so then I waited. The next day, a 4-footer was there, and I thought, well, he's still pretty big, but I'll make a try. So we have a parachute flare cartridge. When you pull a shark out of the water, immediately their mouth opens. And so I said, I'm going to pull his tail out quickly, pull him into the raft, and before he bites the raft or any of us, put the cartridge in his mouth. And it happened perfectly. I pulled him in, and the pilot shoved the casing into his mouth, and he clamped down on it and wouldn't let go. And then I had a pair of pliers on the raft. Now, after 47 days, we couldn't figure out what the pliers were for. And we had a patching kit, like a bicycle patching kit. And you use sandpaper to rough up the rubber to make the patch stick. That's what they had, sandpaper, and the sand was on the bottom and the paper was blank. They should have had waterproof emery cloth. Everything was wrong about this raft. And so we began to look around for the trademark. We thought they had to be made in Germany or Japan.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I took the brass mirror, and I made 3 big teeth marks on the edge of the mirror, and I could actually rip your arm open from here to here with one swish, but it took me about 10 or 15 minutes to open a hole in the belly of that 4-foot or 5-foot shark. They are tough. So we had a lovely dinner of raw liver. 20% of the shark is liver, so you got a lot of liver. Before World War II, all vitamin pills were made from shark liver. And I knew how nutritious it was, but survival school said you don't eat the meat unless it's cooked. It smells like ammonia. And then about a week later, we caught another shark, a little smaller, 4-footer. And so we had 2 luscious meals on the raft.
But as you were out at sea, a plane came by. You thought it was an American plane. It turns out to be a Japanese plane. It fires on you. Ultimately, you make it to the Marshall Islands, where you are rescued, ironically, by the Japanese. And now you are ultimately, after being beaten, being recognized as an Olympian. They seem to know who you were. And how did they know that you were Louis Zamperini, the American Olympic athlete?
Well, I'll tell you, the Japanese knew more about American athletes than we did, and more about our movie stars. That's all they talk about. And we heard that in prison camp. Oh, Shirley Temple had an abortion and died. Stuff like that. They tried to discourage us. But when I was missing, it made headlines in America, and so they picked it up on the radio, and they were really surprised. And they knew me. In fact, for 4 days we couldn't walk, so we had to be carried over their shoulders. And
how much did you weigh at this point, Louis?
I lost, I was 165. I went down to 65.
Wow.
So I was a skeleton. And now the situation for the next 43 days on land was far worse than being on the life raft. So I used to pray there, God, get me out on that raft. I want to die out there where it's clean and beautiful sky. But here we were in this filth, constant, permanent diarrhea. And then all kinds of things happened. They injected us, and submarines launched there. And 80 men would come ashore and tease us and spit on us and throw rocks at us. But I'd say the most disappointing thing was when we went before the interrogation panel, 6 naval officers in white uniforms with gold braid, medals, all that. And before the interrogation started, one of the officers said, Mr. Zamperini, or Lieutenant Zamperini, when you were entering USC in 1936, I was graduating. And this guy said he was a Trojan, and that was hard for me to believe. He was the most obnoxious of the 6, and I just couldn't figure it out. I finally had to come to the conclusion that he was a third-year transfer from UCLA.
But ultimately you were to meet the cruelest of all men. His nickname was the Bird. What was his actual name?
Mitsushiro Watanabe.
This man singled you out and beat you mercilessly, tormented you, just gave you the worst treatment imaginable, and he became like a plague to you, didn't he?
Yeah, well, it all started when I was put into Ofuna. That's a secret camp, and it's for high-profile prisoners, people like Pappy Boylan was shot down Friday, he's there Saturday. Wow. He's got current information. And now the head interrogator there went to SC with me. And I asked him, I said, I'm not a high-profile prisoner. 47 days on a raft, 43 days in a cell, on months getting to Yokohama. He wouldn't tell me anything. But after a year and a month, I'm transferred to headquarters, Omori, and I found out the reason why. It takes a year and a month to be declared dead. Oh. And they were waiting for me to be declared dead so they could condemn America. And the first propaganda they had on the radio, and I think it's in the book, And then the purpose was, because on Kwajalein, our day of execution was set, but another officer came there and said it would better serve Japan's purpose to send Louis on to Tokyo to make propaganda broadcasts. So that saved our life. But when I made this broadcast to my parents, that was just a ruse, the first step. And the second time I went to the radio, they provided me with the script that they wrote, and it was propaganda. And it was subtle, but then that's the way they get you. You say, well, it's not that bad. Yeah. Then the next time it's a little stronger, and I refused to read it. And but I was able to steal a copy, which is in the book, I think. And so then the bird was mean enough as he was, but I think they gave him orders to make my life miserable, so I would accept a better life of cafeteria food in Radio Tokyo in a hotel room. I met 2 Australians and an American that were doing that, and when I shook their hands, they couldn't look in my eyes, and I think they were sending me a message. There's no way I could do it. I mean, I'd have to live with that the rest of my life. Right. And so I was sent to a slave labor camp, and I thought, thank God I'm getting away from Mr. Shiro Watanabe, the bird. But then he was transferred to another camp. There's 90 camps in Japan proper. Well, he's at one of those camps. Then 2 weeks later, I'm transferred to another camp. I'm told to stand at attention and face the guard shack, and I did. And the door opens, and out steps Watanabe. And on my knees buckled, and I thought, that's useless. And I'll start all over again. And so he worked me over right to the end. But he knew the war was over 2 days before we did. And so the bird flew the coop, yeah.
And what you would eat, some days you would be given a ball of rice, right, thrown on the ground. In your book, Unbroken, it says, the food was infested with rat droppings, maggots, and so much sand and grit that Louis's teeth were soon pitted, chipped, and cracked. The men nicknamed the rations all dumpo.
Yeah.
Just horrible food.
Well, that's why I think guys were dying. We lost 80 guys in one winter.
Yeah. In
one camp. And that happened all over Japan. And the food was, it wasn't rice. Rice was a luxury.
Yeah.
It was, I think it was millet, some kind of red grain, but it had grit in it and stuff like that that chipped our teeth. And then they gave us tooth powder, which was pumice with mint in it, and it wore the enamel off our teeth. Yeah. So that's prison life.
Yeah. So World War II finally comes to an end. The Japanese really are not willing to surrender. President Truman gives the order, and the atomic bomb is dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan finally surrenders, and Louis Zamperini, who is thought dead but is alive, returns home to a hero's welcome. Is that how it was when he came home again?
Yeah, everybody was startled that I was alive. I mean, the official death certificate I had at home, and my parents wouldn't believe it. They just had, well, a lot of parents had hope, but my brother said to my mom and dad, don't worry about Louis. If he's got a toothbrush, he can survive anywhere.
Yeah, and you did. And you married Cynthia Applewhite. You told me a story last night where you said that all the hardship you went through in the war helped prepare you for marriage. Do you remember? How did that go?
Well, I don't know why I said that, but after I carried the torch in Nagano, the mayor had me up to answer a question at the city council, and that was the question he asked me. Did anything good come out of your being a prisoner of war for 2.5 years? And I just said, yeah, it prepared me for 55 years of married life. But actually, if it hadn't been for the war or Watanabe and the post-traumatic stress, that's what drove me to Christ.
Yeah.
I mean, when I got on my knees and accepted Christ, what a relief to know that I'd passed from one life into another. And but
prior to your commitment to Christ at the Billy Graham Crusade in Los Angeles, you started drinking heavily. You were experiencing what we now call post-traumatic stress syndrome, but back then they didn't have a name for it. You were having nightmares about the bird. One night, you woke up with your hands around your wife's throat thinking you were choking the bird, correct?
Yeah, well, we were both scared. I couldn't figure out what was happening. But the nightmares started in prison because every day when he would punish me, I'd clench my fist. Yeah. And he knew I wanted to hit him. And he said, if I draw my sword, I must use it. So I had nightmares there all the way home. And there was never a night I didn't dream about getting this guy. And but when I woke up in a cold sweat with my hand around my wife's throat, that really scared me. And of course, it scared her. And then we were, a young couple in the apartment came to our apartment and knocked on the door and started telling us about a young evangelist coming to LA. And he started to quote scripture, and boy, that hit me. I said, hey, I'm out of here. And my wife listens. And when Billy came, they talked her into going down with them. And in the meantime, she'd already filed for a divorce. Yeah. And then, but when she came home and tried to get me to go down, I fought her. But then she said something that softened me up. She said, because of my conversion, I'm not going to get a divorce. Well, that really softened me up a bit, and so she was able to persuade me to go down and hear Billy. But then again, he was quoting scripture, and that really hit me between the eyes. And I said, I don't need anybody to tell me I'm a sinner. I know I am. And so I got mad, pulled her on home. But the next day, she's all over me again. And I said, okay, I'll go back on one condition. When he says every head bowed and every eye closed, we're out. And so back again we went, and Billy's finishing his sermon. And I said, let's go. And then he said something like, when people come to the end of their rope and they have nowhere else to turn, they turn to God. And I thought, yeah, that's what I did. And on the raft in prison camp, all the prisoners were praying about the same prayer, get me home alive to my family and I'll seek you and serve you. Well, he got me home alive and I didn't keep my promise, and that really hit me between the eyes. So instead of leaving the tent, I went back to the prayer room and made a confession of my faith in Christ.
In an interview you did, Louis, you made this statement about your conversion. Quote, I got off my knees and somehow I knew I was through getting drunk. I knew it. I knew that I forgave all of my guards, including the bird. I think proof of that is that I had nightmares every night about the bird since the war, and I haven't had a nightmare since the night I made my decision for Jesus Christ, 1949 till now. That's right? Still true. So now, you wanted to kill the bird. You've made a commitment to Jesus Christ at a Billy Graham crusade, and you've been able to forgive him. So you return to Japan, and you want to actually talk with him and meet him. And you actually wrote a letter to him because you were told that he was no longer alive. But you wrote a letter in hopes of meeting him. Would you read that letter to us?
So, Mr. Cyril Watanabe, as a result of my prisoner of war experience under your unwarranted and unreasonable punishment, my post-war life became a nightmare. It was not so much due to the pain and the suffering as it was to the tension of stress and humiliation that caused me to hate with a vengeance. Under your discipline, my rights not only as a prisoner but also as a human being were stripped from me. It was a struggle to maintain enough dignity and hope to live until the war's end. The post-war nightmares caused my life to crumble, but thanks to a confrontation with God through the evangelist Billy Graham, I committed my life to Christ. Love replaced the hate I had for you. Christ said, forgive your enemies and pray for them. As you probably know, I returned to Japan in 1952 and was graciously allowed to address all the Japanese war criminals at Sugamo prison. I asked them about you and was told that you probably had committed harikiri. which I was sad to hear. At that moment, like the others, I also forgave you and now would hope that you would also become a Christian.
Okay, that's wonderful. Now, as it turns out, and you found out later the bird was actually still alive. He was running from the authorities. He was a declared war criminal. He became aware of the fact that you wanted to meet with him, but he agreed to meet you, and then at the last minute, he refused to meet you. Is that correct?
Well, the 60 Minutes did the video, the one that won the Emmy Award. And they did get him on the street, and it was the first interview of his life. And he agreed to talk to him. But then his son and grandson came out of the house, and then 60 Minutes did a condemnation thing on him, accused him of all these crimes. And the son and grandson didn't know he was a guard. They didn't know he was wanted by MacArthur. And boy, they stopped and said, no more of this. Now, before that happened, he said he would meet with me. But after the son and grandson stopped the whole conversation, I never got to meet with him. Nobody could talk to him on the phone or see him in person.
Yeah.
And he died about, I guess, 5 or 6 years ago.
Boy, that was his loss, I'll tell you. But, to listen to your life, Louis, is just so amazing. It's like you've lived multiple lives. At Louis, the Olympic athlete, the Torrance tornado who shook the hand of Adolf Hitler, Louis, the World War II vet who fought for his country, Louis, the survivor of a horrific plane crash, of being adrift at sea for 47 days, Louis, the concentration camp survivor, and then a man who plunged into alcoholism and was transformed by Jesus Christ. And you were able to forgive the people that did this horrific thing to you. And there are people here with us tonight or watching or listening on the internet, and they've been wronged in life, they've been hurt in life, and they've probably said, I could never forgive, but you were able to forgive. How were you able to extend that forgiveness?
Well, I didn't know when it happened. When I received Christ as my Savior, I knew when I was still on my knees that I was a different person, and I didn't know what happened. And then later, of course, as I began to study the Scriptures, I realized that when I invited Christ into my life, therefore, if any man be in Christ, he's a new person, new creation. And
yes.
that was the answer. But at that time, I didn't know it. I just knew something phenomenal happened.
Yeah.
But I had not the slightest hate for the bird anymore. I loved everybody. And so the first miracle was not having the nightmares, or I should say my conversion, not having nightmares. And then the third miracle was the Bible. I could never understand it. In the Pacific, they gave us olive drab Bibles, and nobody could understand it, so we just threw it in our footlocker. So I took my olive drab New Testament, I walked up into the Hollywood Park, and I started to read it, and now it made sense. And when I got to the crucifixion on the cross and the treatment that God the Son went through, and the torture and the humiliation, I started to cry. I never cried in my life. But nobody could make me cry as a kid. I was just defiant, but this did it.
Yeah. Wow. How does a person accept Jesus Christ, Louis? You heard Billy preach, and I know you know what it means to follow Christ, and I know you've shared this with many people, but someone's listening right now, they would say, I want to have a relationship with God like Louis Zamperini. What do they need to do?
Well, first of all, they have to realize that God had promised he would come to earth someday, and he came in Jesus Christ. God was in Christ reconciling man unto himself. And John 3:16 that tells us why he came. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Very clear. And then further he says, if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in thine heart that God raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. And boy, that is really a turning about. That's what conversion is, 180 degrees from where you're going. You're going south, and now you're going north. And I'll tell you that my life ever since then has been a bubble. But I've gone through some awful things since I've been a Christian. And God tested me, especially when I said, oh, yeah, I believe all things work together for good. And then I broke my hip. And I thought, Lord, I know all things work together for good. This better be good. And every time something happened to me since I've been a Christian, it always worked together for good. So now I'm a 100% believer in that. That is the toughest thing to accept in the Bible, is to believe that everything that happens works together for good.
Yes, it is. And some of those things, work out in this life, and I think some other things when we get to heaven will be fully understood. We may not understand why God allowed all the things we've gone through in life have happened, but he promises that he will ultimately work all things together for good. We want to thank you, Louis, for coming. Your amazing story. You inspire us all. And So last night we gave you a skateboard. Tonight we're giving you your own surfboard. You may recognize this kind of a surfboard. This is what you call old school style from the days of Hawaii with Duke. The Duke Kamana, how do you pronounce his name?
Duke Hanamoko.
Duke Hanamoko. You knew the Duke, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, he took care of me when I came back from prison camp for a week, made me a member of the Outrigger Canoe Club, took me out every day on the Outrigger.
Another one of your lives. You have so many lives, and so the Duke is called the father of modern surfing, and you surfed with him, didn't you?
I surfed during the Gidget years, yeah.
The Gidget years. And, so now you have a surfboard.
We're close to San Onofre, right?
Yeah, we are.
Can I have my board now?
Yes. And here's your. This is the Olympic torch you carried. Was it the 1984 Olympics?
Yeah.
And so you carried this and you ran with this torch and still have it today. And we want to thank you for coming, and God bless you, Louis. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Louis Zamperini.